Okay, so Roger, again, thank you for being with us today. Thanks. Your book has been kind of a grounding piece of the work we've done leading up to our conversations here. This collective council is made up of 9 young adults, 8 of who are present right now, one of who is, we are praying for Chris. He's in the midst of some transition, but, and so again, we've met twice via Zoom, and this is our first time actually meeting in person. And these are young adults that we as a 787 Collective here at Austin Seminary are using as kind of an advisory council, but also a development space as well. And so this time together is a bit of advising, like hearing them share experiences from their own communities is giving us insights on how we both program, but also what the things we need to create and where we need to resource young people in the midst of their faith formation. And then this afternoon, we'll do some work on some developing ideas around how do we use spiritual practices for young people and create them in ways that are useful and both pragmatic, but also re-enchanting, as we just had a conversation before you signed on with us here. So I'm going to let them go around real fast and kind of say who they are and where they're from and what community they're representing. And then I'll let you, Roger, do an introduction of yourself as well. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right. Cece, why don't we, since we start with Joel every time, we'll start with you.
I'm Cece. I don't know if you can see my hand maybe on the owl. I'm from Austin and I live in Austin and I serve a congregation in Spicewood, which is just west of Austin, called Spirit in the Hills. And then I also co-lead a young adult ministry collaborative here in Austin called Gather Austin with Joel, who will introduce himself last.
Hi there, my name is Ashley. I currently serve a United Methodist Church in Houston, along with also a young adult collective called the Epworth League there in Houston as well.
I'm Al. I serve a church in Arlington, Texas, originally from New York. I lead our young adult ministry at our church too, and also lead a kind of citywide young adult ministry called Link Up as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and my name is Elisa, and I am originally from Guatemala, and I live here in Austin, Texas now. And I serve mostly like within the immigrant community church, within church community.
Okay.
Latino.
Hi, I'm Mercedes, and I live here in Austin. I serve young adults outside of the church in different classes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm Shanika. I am from Maryland. I live in Mansfield, Texas. I work with the young adults in my church, a Baptist church up in Mansfield, and then I also help out with Link Up sometimes.
Hello, I am Brandon Dooley. I am from Austin, Texas, born and raised here. I serve as a youth and young adult pastor here at Mount Zion Baptist Church and the youth and young adult pastor at a church in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Okay.
Hey, I am Joel. I am from Portland, Oregon, and I live here in Austin, Texas. And I work at Shepherd of the Hills Lutheran Church. And then I also help co-lead Gather Austin, a collective of Lutheran young adults in the city.
Okay.
And then just, I think, real quick, I'm Phil Dickey. I'm a United Methodist clergy person, but I'm serving as the Director of Congregational Innovation at Austin Seminary here. And part of that is kind of overseeing the 787 Collective and getting to work with these lovely young folk here. Keeping me young or making me feel really old, a little bit of both all at the same time. So, Roger, we'd love to hear a little background on you.
Yeah, so I'm a United Methodist pastor, born and raised in Minnesota. I've served churches in Minnesota, Iowa, and Colorado. I did 14 years as the director of the Wesley Foundation at CU Boulder in Colorado. So a big chunk of my, 28 years of ministry has been in campus ministry, and the rest has been the local church. And as if you've read the book, those years in Boulder were profoundly transformative in my life and led me to different places and expanded what I see as how God is at work in the world. So the last 3 years, my last ministry in Colorado was in Grand Junction. I've been serving a church in Mankato, Minnesota, which is about an hour and 20 minutes south of the Twin Cities, for a full year now. And I'm not sure what else to share. If you read my book, you probably know pretty much more than most people know about me. I didn't hold back very much. It's not exactly a memoir, but it does share the healing journey, the wounding journey, the healing journey, and how these practices have been part of that. So you actually know quite a bit about me. So is that enough for now?
Yeah, I think it's great. Part of our storytelling experiences that we shared last night, and even in we have a commitments of presence that we open all of our gatherings with, and one of them talks about vulnerability. So I'd love to know what brought you the courage and inspired you to be so vulnerable in a book, because you do, like, you lay a lot of things out there.
Yeah, there's a lot to that, and I'll try to do justice to a few pieces succinctly. So first of all, I'm from Minnesota, and Minnesota, there's this stereotypical Minnesota nice, and it's we're almost Canadians, and there's a certain Scandinavian influenced part of the culture uh, it works well to help people get along beautifully, but there's also a dark side to it. There's a surface level nicety, but then there's a passive aggressive reality that can show up, and there's a certain way that people are rather repressed in what they share and who they share it with. And so those 20 plus years in Colorado, further west you go, the more loose things tend to be in this country. And that opened me up to what is safe to talk about and feelings coming online. So that's part of it, is a gift back to the Midwest to try to show that we don't need to live such repressed, color inside the lines kind of lives. It's okay. The water's safe out here, in the deeper, more vulnerable levels. Another piece of it is my dad. I haven't framed it this way, but I've been thinking about it the last few days. He's gone from independent living to assisted living, now to memory care with stroke-induced dementia. So it's like he has Alzheimer's, but it's not Alzheimer's. It's stroke-induced dementia. And he's had 2 big strokes in his life, and then maybe some minor ones more recently. The two big strokes he had, 4 days after his mother died 20 years ago, he short-circuited and had a stroke, a big one. And he recovered from it pretty well. They got that medicine in him in that 3-hour window, which is important, and he kind of rebounded. And then my mother died April of 2021. 3 days after she died, guess what? He had a stroke, a big one. And he was raised in an era, he was born in 1936. He was raised in an era where men were pretty repressed, even more than now. I share in the book some stuff with his permission, thankfully. That he really, it's a profound thing that he did. Most of my life I did not know this, but in the last 5 years, he started opening up and was more transparent about things. And when he was 13, it was a big year in his life. His dad made him shoot his dog because it was maybe bit his sister or something happened. And then also that same year, he was raped by a neighbor boy who was 17. And he had only told his mom about it, and then my mom many years later, but nobody else. And to make things worse, that neighbor's boy's mother was my dad's mother's best friend, and she didn't want to risk losing that friendship, so she basically threw my dad under the bus and didn't deal with that at all, and just carried on as if everything's normal. And he started to stutter when he was 13, and he had not connected the dots. He didn't realize that it was that year, and I helped him connect those dots. And much of his life he had a stutter, and it sort of phased out maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago, gradually. And I would suggest that that way of being a man, of repressing feelings, the only time I ever saw him cry was for about 5 minutes when his dad died, and then when he had some kidney stones. Those are the only 2 times I saw the man cry. And he had a rather limited emotional range. And so when traumatic stuff shows up, he didn't have any other way to respond except to have a stroke. And so knowing that that is possible, like I've seen it, and it, not just once, but twice, as a gift to men in this culture, to help more men in particular be able to say, hey, there's another man who shared vulnerably. There's this guy did that. Maybe I'm not going to go that far, but maybe I can do a little more than I might have. So it's in a way, the book is a gift to men and other people that have, for whatever reason, have had a reduced range of what they think they can share and be with. So there's an educational intentionality about it. Yeah.
Pause. Give anyone opportunity to reflect on what Roger shared.
Wow. It's like adjacent to the work of Professor Vandal Koch, right? Like the.
So when y'all, if you have a question or something and you pipe in, maybe just remind Roger your name whenever you pipe in, because I'm sure the owl is doing its wonderful work, but just so he can know who's saying. But Roger, I know I invited you to maybe even like kind of kick us off with a practice of our own here. Is now a good time to dive into that, you feel like?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. I did not talk about this particular practice in Discovering Fire. There's maybe like 32 things I do talk about, but this one wasn't in the book. But this is what I would call a presence practice. And in some respects, it's a little like centering prayer, or meditation, but it's a little different. It's a little less structured. I'll begin it with a little structure, and then we'll move into a time of simply being present to presence, without any theological, spiritual filters or trappings, just raw presence. But I'll begin with a little bit. So I think what I'll invite us all to do is sit upright, however that feels to you, and just take a moment, and let's begin by doing this. We're gonna get tense in order to get loose. So everybody, raise your shoulders up high towards your ears, and then bring them back and slowly down. We'll do that one more time. Up high, and then bring them back and slowly down. And that probably already made a shift in your body. And now I'm going to invite us to take a couple of deep breaths together. So let's just breathe in on a count of 3 and hold it for a count of 3 and out for a count of 3. So in, hold, out. And we'll do that 2 more times. In on 3, out, in. And I'm going to invite you to notice what you feel. You might notice your sit bones and your seat holding you up, basically literally supporting you, that seat's doing all the work, and you can just trust it and lean into it. So this particular thing that I'm going to share is helpful for people having a panic attack, but it's also good for just being present. So let's just take a moment and notice 3 things that you see. Colors, persons, walls, whatever. 3 things that you see. Be with each one for about 3 seconds. And now let's go back to the body, the physicality. 3 things that you feel. It could be your sit bones, your thighs on the seat. It could be maybe cool or warm air. It could be clothing on your skin. What are 3 things that you feel? And be with each one for 3 seconds. And now, this might be hard to do 3 things, but taste. Do you taste anything? Coffee, toothpaste, donut, whatever. What do you taste? Residue of something. Do you taste anything? Try to notice 1 or 2 tastes. And now, this one might have more. 3 things that you hear. It could be the gurgling of your stomach, the sound of a air conditioning unit, something in the hallway. What are 3 things that you hear? And be with each sound for 3 seconds. Okay, we've done some awareness work. We're present. We're probably, your system might already feel a shift. You might feel more grounded, more like you're arrived, you're here. You might just feel that. And safe. You might feel more safe even. And so from this place of safety and arrival, I'm going to invite us to move into a time of just being present. We'll do it for about 4 minutes. Maybe we'll stick with 3. We'll do it for 3 minutes. Some words leading into it. If those that are familiar with the Bible, so David frequently played his lyre to kind of soothe the emotions of Saul, whether it was a harp or a guitar, a lyre, something. He played music, and Saul was calmed down because of it. But I would suggest that really the lyre was a crutch. It was David's presence that he needed. He needed to be witnessed and held and seen. He needed David's presence. And in the book of Job, he's got all these traumas and calamities, and 3 friends show up. And I think it's for 3 days they sit with him. And they don't say a word. They just sit with him. And then a few days later, they start talking about theology, and it kind of goes off the tracks, not in a good way. But for 3 days, they showed up. They were present to their friend in his time of need. They were present to him, and that he needed their presence. And similarly, Jesus had some charisma. People wanted to hear his vision of a kingdom, a beloved community that was compelling. But as compelling as his words were, and the vision was, there was something about his being, his presence, that was compelling. People wanted to be in his presence. They were blessed by his presence. So I'm going to invite us to be blessed by presence, bless each other with our presence, bless Creator with our presence, receive Creator's presence. And without any prayer words or anything, let's just for 3 minutes be present to presence, surrounded by presence. Let's be present. I'm curious how that landed with people. Did you notice anything?
Well, I read that part of the book that talked about like centering prayer and that sort of thing. Well, I'm not very good at it. I kept trying to have like a word that would clear my my thoughts, and I just kept returning to thoughts. But nonetheless, it still feels good. You know, it even with the thoughts going on, just not being, just simply, well, just being, I guess, is nice.
Yeah, the not very good at it part, I might have mentioned it in the book. Thomas Keating was one of the Catholic monks who helped bring it to the masses in the early 60s after Vatican II. He died just a few years ago. He said in a centering prayer session, you know, if you have to use your prayer word 1,000 times in 20 minutes, that's not a bad session. How beautiful to return to the Creator 1,000 times. And so there's no such thing as a bad experience. It's just experiences in humility and gratitude and grace. It's grace.
That's good, because I felt like I was doing it wrong, because I couldn't shut my brain off, and it was just like, present, be present, present, oh, birthday, oh, what happened when I was 29, I really liked that outfit, what happened, and then I was like, no, come back to the present, grace, sit in silence. So, and that's a practice that I just started at my home, of just sitting in the quiet, just for like a few minutes, even if it's just 10 minutes out the day, shut everything off, phone, TV, and just sit. Which is hard to do with 2 cats, but but it's something I'm trying to commit myself to, just being here. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Similar, Shanika, I always like hype up spiritual practices, right? Like I have to do it, and we talked about this yesterday, I feel like you have to do it perfectly, or you have to keep doing it, or it has to make a change in your life, or whatever. And I know, like, for something to be a practice, it takes 3 weeks. Like, that's kind of the theory, is it takes you 3 weeks of doing something consistently until it's a practice. And I've done that to get to other practices like nightly journaling. I write a haiku every day, right? Like I do those, but oftentimes just like sitting in stillness or doing morning pages, which is what I've been challenged to do recently as a spiritual practice. Like I just don't give myself the permission. And I feel like a practice as simple as this, 3 minutes, like I can do 3 minutes, right? Like I can do 3 minutes every day because it's such a easy entryway, but I hype up spiritual practices where it's like, no, you need to be able to meditate for like an hour.
Yeah.
I can't do that. But of course I can't do that at this point because I've had no entryway into it. Like, and even those 3 minutes, like I did feel a sense of peace, a sense of stillness. And my word yesterday coming into this weekend was longing, and I felt a sense of peace and a couple of things I've been longing to try to understand. So
2 things that came up for me was in the listening part. So we have a little plug-in cooler here that has a lot of drinks in it in this room, and it was so loud during the listening part. And at first I was like, oh, I should get up and unplug it. And I thought, no, stay present, like just stay present. And then it took me to the space of gratitude that we have a plug-in cooler that allows us to have cold drinks.
Because it's fancy.
It is fancy. It's a cool cooler.
Super distracting me, because I was like, what's that? The cooler?
The cooler is so loud, but like being grateful that we have cold drinks, right? Like, and then in the 3 minutes of just sitting in silence, I heard birds for the first time. Like we've spent a lot of time sitting in this room, and I heard birds for the first time, which was just really beautiful.
Yeah, for me, so near the time when the birds happened, I was thinking of like, okay, be present in this room, and I was like looking at all of you, not like weird. I mean, we all have to be worked out. It was probably weird, but just like being present in this room, and then I heard the bell tower bell, and just like a reminder of like us being present in this room. Also, like life is happening, and yet we're all. Like, anybody who heard that bell tower was connected in that moment to that sound. I think it's because I'm close to the window.
Because I was like, y'all, I did it wrong. I ain't hear no birds.
That's when you were thinking about the outfit.
Everyone's practice is different. Everything's fun.
Don't compare.
You know what? And speaking of comparison, and coming off of what Ashley was saying, I was noticing the way that she was looking out, and I was looking this way, and I was like, wait, maybe I'm not doing this right. Right? Because like she's looking in a different direction than me. She's probably smarter than me anyway, so maybe I need to like do what she's doing. And so then I looked outside, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm getting on the right track here. And I know that's not the point of this, but it's just like how my brain works and how we can do that, even when we're supposed to be in a moment with ourselves, with the creator. And we're like, okay, well, how is somebody else doing this? Are they doing it for an hour? Because I only got 3 minutes. So does that mean that I'm not, you know? And we can have conversation and we can affirm, no, you're good, right? Yeah. You're good the way that you're doing it. But like something in you is just like, no, they're doing it better than you. Like,
Al, are you an Enneagram 3?
He might
That's
be.
my favorite number.
I was
But for me, comparison is the thing I struggle with the most, and it's like the realest sin in my life. Yeah. For me, like the way the sin manifests in so many ways, but like comparison is such it's just the root of the devil in my life because it sucks joy and it sucks relationship. If I look at you and I'm like, because you're like, Ashley's is she smarter than me? I'm like, all you people are smarter than me, right? And that's how I'm sitting here thinking, look at all these wise people in the room. Oh my God. And then if I get into the evil of comparison, the sin, drawing away from the goodness of the wisdom that you all bring, and I go to, oh, they're better than me, that's going to harm the relationship.
Why are we consumed with not doing it wrong?
We haven't given space to fail. Bad.
Right.
Bad.
That's real.
Going back to what you said, first I was just in my mind and I was enjoying the beauty of just letting my mind roam or think about whatever. Because oftentimes it's so easy to get distracted by everything that's coming towards us. And I was like, Mercedes, you're kind of smart when you just sit still for a moment. You got your own watch, you know that, right? So I was enjoying that and I was just like, I need to do this more often. So I was like, how can I incorporate this? Because I also am challenging myself and my mother to just, not the 75 hard, but the 75 medium or whatever, just to help her with her health. And I was like, yeah, we'll do it together, whatever. So we were incorporating workouts. So I was like, how can we incorporate behoving as well as the reading and stuff? And I think meditating or just being present is a very valuable lesson. And then once I was done with my own thoughts, I just started looking around. I was like, oh, look at all these people with their eyes closed. And then I was looking at Roger and I was like, he's just looking straight. And so I started just looking straight at you. Okay. What does it mean to be present for me? It was also meaning to take in my surrounding as well. Not necessarily compare, but just to be this is also what it is to be present. Here I am in this moment and these are the things that are around me as well.
So we're actually, in a way, just now, this sharing that's taking place, I don't know if you saw the part in the book that talked about authentic relating. So, being real and transparent in the moment. And, it's a vulnerable share to say, hey, I sometimes struggle with other people being better than me, or I think they're smarter than me. I mean, that's a vulnerable share. And rather than anyone hearing that and feeling, oh, I don't want to be around that insecure dude, or that's kind of icky. I don't like hearing about that. For most of us hear that and go, oh, I feel like a fellow human's talking. I'm that way too, and it becomes more endearing and connecting rather than off-putting, right? So the thing that you think might lead people to think less of you if they only knew is the thing that actually draws people to you. Ironically, it's a beautiful paradox. And so even just the sharing that we're doing right now is its own practice. It's its own practice. It's a spiritual practice in community, laying down our cards. I feel this way too. Oh, I also feel that way. And it draws us together. And you don't have to be the same. You can still be your own person. Well, I don't have that issue as much as that person, but I have my own issues, It allows us to celebrate ourselves and each other. And really another piece of it is a theme throughout the book is that whole saying of Jesus, that which he got from Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that assumes that you love yourself. And so there's some struggles that many of us have. And a step toward that process is being aware of yourself, knowing yourself. Oh, I feel insecure right now. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm comparing myself to others. And all that stuff is part of knowing yourself. And once you know yourself, can I have grace and compassion for what I'm knowing? Can I welcome it? Can I love it? And that's really the lifelong work.
That's one of my favorite scriptures. That and you are the light of the world, like a city. That one. But more so recently, this first one, as I know I'm meant to use my voice and help others, and I've been through life or whatever like that, and sharing stories and all these other things. But in my own personal healing journey, it's just the more I've grown and I've seen the way it affected myself. It's just one, our relationships are a reflection of us, and then two, it's just as you change and grow, you can see oh yeah, you might need a little help over here, or you could benefit from the change as well. So I recently that scripture has just had a hold on me in the way I view things and view myself. And I'm if I ever have an issue with somebody else, I was okay, so what is this saying about me?
That's good. So, Roger, right before we began with you, we were with Dr. David White, and he ended by talking about spiritual practices being an opportunity to re-enchant the world. And I think it kind of stirred in us a little bit and resonated with some of the inklings of our souls here too. And so I would love to just hear one kind of a grounding of what spiritual practices mean to you, and then what I would love for you to elaborate a little bit on what you think of when you hear this idea of re-enchanting the world.
Well, at this point in my journey, last week was my 56th trip around the sun, and so I'm on to the new starting of the 56, I guess, is what's going on now. I'm different than I was in my 20s for sure, but when I look back on it, I did have some awe, and I'm grateful for that. Poetry was something that came online to me pretty young. I didn't do very much of it in the 20s and 30s, and then it came back on starting around 37, 38. And so there's something that seems to happen between mid-20s and, let's say, late 30s. That's the time in this culture where you're leveling up. You're trying to make a difference in the world, and put a roof over your head, build up your career. It's a lot of go, go, go energy. And it's easy to get into autopilot. Come home, you're exhausted from work, throw on the TV, fall asleep, start it all over again. And so it's easy to go into an autopilot mode that is not open to awe, not noticing of grandeur, into a non-appreciative, non-grateful, non-wow kind of way of being. And so it takes effort. You have to go out of your way to, okay, Saturday's the day I go to the park and I sit in a hammock and listen to the cicadas and the turtle doves for an hour or two. I mean, you have to kind of create some rituals and routines that allow you to be in spaces where you could have awe more and be more grateful and more, you have to drive out of the city to see the stars and make a point. Well, maybe twice a month I drive an hour outside of the city lights and I go someplace where I can see the Milky Way, or at least the Big Dipper, whatever. And so those things, I would say, are spiritual practices. And Lamott famously says there's three basic prayers: thanks, help, and wow. And wow is the awe, and it's we aren't being fully the human beings we're called to be if we don't make room for some wow time. So these practices basically create favorable conditions for some wow. whether it's the inner journey of wow or going someplace and experiencing the grandeur of creation aspect of it, or even in your own garden, or going to someone else's garden and looking at the ladybugs and the dragonflies or whatever. I mean, you don't have to even drive very far, but it requires a certain intentional mindset. I'm choosing to notice. I'm choosing to have some awe in my life. And what was the word that you were using?
Re-enchanting.
Yeah, enchanting. Yeah, so this is all the same piece. And it doesn't necessarily mean a magical thinking. It can be just straight out reality, but reality can be the background default that we're oblivious to, or we can choose to notice, and that's where it happens.
I had just kind of a thought here, kind of connecting some things. I think in one of the earlier chapters, he talked about how people are less convinced by logic and reason when it comes to faith. And so maybe just in general, Christian apologetics, and are more moved by, what you say here. Instead, they realize that faith comes by noticing the lives of people who have faith and then living into it themselves. And I hear a lot of this re-enchantment from a time of disenchantment. And so I'm wondering, like, do you have any thoughts on that shift from logic and reason back to just experience?
Yeah, something comes to mind. So my first book was Kissing Fish, Christianity for People Who Don't Like Christianity. And early in that book, I shared about my early childhood experiences of God. I would sing little recitals to God, Jesus loves me, or God bless America, anything that had God in it. I would be singing it to God, age 3, 4, 5, these little recitals to God at night. And it was really magical and beautiful. And then I did the confirmation program in the United Methodist Church in St. Paul, and I took it seriously, and I got a lot out of it. And then Confirmation Sunday happened, and then the next Sunday I became an atheist. And that 13, 14-year-old brain was really judgmental. Like, I've learned all about Jesus in this way, this radical, transformative way. And here I'm seeing a bunch of people dressed up in Sunday fancy clothes, big stained glass windows, fancy pipe organ, lots of money to keep this artifice happening. But where's Jesus? Where's love? Where's transformation? And I was all judgy. But then in time, I came to think, okay, well, maybe I don't reject God. Maybe I'm not an atheist. Maybe I'm an a-churchist. So I was an a-churchist in my mind for a while. And then I experienced the church a little bit more, and I saw how they were bringing in Hmong and Laotian refugees from Vietnam and Cambodia, and teaching them English, getting them housing, how people were volunteering, serving at the Dorothy Day Center, feeding hungry folks several days a week. And I saw more and more, if I go a little deeper, I actually see the church showing up and being the church and making a difference in people's lives. And this Sunday thing gives people a little hope to get out there and do the other stuff during the rest of the week. And I just had a more mature perspective. It took a few years to get there. And so I think that speaks to your question a bit. So there's the childhood innocence, there's the judgmental adolescent, a little maturation happened, and I began to be more aware, more informed, more charitable. And I saw that following Jesus is hard to do solo, so doing it with others makes sense. Oh, that's called church. Okay. But it's possible to be a part of a church where you're just going through the motions and you're not really availing yourself to sharing life together. And so some churches do a better job than others of creating the life groups and the service opportunities and the spiritual depth opportunities, and some don't do so much of that, and you feel the difference. So the churches that provide all those needs and try to meet those needs generally are healthier and will last longer. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say a church, but I feel like that resonates with a lot of. Maybe well, yeah, I think it does resonate with some of the things we talked about already in our gathering time together. And I would love to hear your perspective on inviting the church in the way that it often presents itself now, whether that's stuck in the rote rigid. Again, I'm being a bit reductive here, but whether that's liturgical or just so stuck in their ways. And what are some steps to take, inviting people into this re-enchantment and inviting people into these experiences beyond just what we often do on a Sunday morning through worship?
Yeah, I'm just Googling. I wrote an article on Patheos a few years ago called 10 Ways Churches Could Bring Us to God. And I explore that a little bit, and I'm looking at it, reminding myself, I've got some things in here about adjusting the words that are heard, adjusting the creeds. We can update things. Things don't have to be set exactly the way they have been for a while. Everything is in motion, and everything has changed, including the Lord's Prayer. There's so that the things that we think can never possibly change. Well, if you look in the history of it, there's been a lot of change of the very things that we think can't change. So freeing up liturgy, bringing in more poetry, poetry of the people in the room, songs written by the people in the room, changing the songs that we have heard, but doing it in new ways, worshiping in the garden next door instead of in the sanctuary occasionally, or whatever. There's lots of ways to keep things fresh, and maybe we aren't going to do church in this way today. We're going to go to the fellowship hall. We've got this portable labyrinth rolled out, and we're going to do this. There's things we can do to keep us more fresh and open and less stuck in the color in the lines approach. And there'll be resistance from some folks as you attempt this. And so it's a dance of maintaining some familiarity and gradually bringing in some new. But what we know isn't going to work is, well, I shouldn't say what we know. The Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox have done a pretty good job of keeping things going and not having a whole lot of change. But if you go deeper, you will see, in fact, there has been change. They're not worshiping in Latin anymore. I mean, they have had changes. Well, that's a first crack at it, I guess.
Anybody have thoughts or responses on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I pastor a small church, and I've been feeling very stuck in our liturgy. I'm Lutheran, and so we follow a very ordered worship pattern. And I mean, because I am a solo pastor, it's just me. Like, I'm there. It's Sunday in, Sunday out, and I've been feeling very bored. And so I've been yearning to shake things up, and I like these opportunities that you're adding. But I also appreciate that you said it's a dance, because if it was up to me, we would just, like, tomorrow, everything would just look so different, right? Like, I could make it, we would sit in a round, I would move the communion table, I wouldn't be we would pass communion to each other, we would have poetry in addition to reading. But, like, to get there, my congregation needs to be accompanied so that it's not too new, too scary, too unfamiliar, that they don't feel seen anymore.
Right.
Taking that into account is really important.
Yeah.
And as one of my congregants is doing this session through the Oblate Center in San Antonio on aging well, how to be a good elder. And one of the lessons there is, as you get older, you get really stuck in rigidity. Like, you hold on to things so tightly. It's the fight of, depending on how old all y'all's parents or grandparents are, you're like fighting against going into independent living, fighting against leaving their house, fighting against not driving anymore. Losing those pieces of their identity, they just clamp so hard down onto not. But how do you remain open instead of closed off? How do you remain flexible? You said fresh. I like that understanding. How do we make things fresh rather than rigid?
Yeah.
I think to respond to that, without the grandparents thing, the rigidity of it all, like what I'm working on now has to do with like intergenerational ministry and such. And one of the things that I've learned in that process, I forget the book, I forget the author, but growth and decline happen at the same time over the course of the lifespan. So all of us are growing and declining from birth to death, right? There's always an aspect of growing, there's always an aspect of declining, there's always something to learn. Reciprocal learning and wisdom takes place regardless of the generation. So you can be a child, and that grandparent can learn something from that child, and that child can learn something from the grandparent. And I think what is important about that is seeing the beauty even in the rigidity, that it is a blessing to be able to get to a place in life where you feel as if there's something that you really want to hold on to, and how scary it can be where the pace of the world has sped up so much because of these technological devices, and everybody is just like, we got to be new, we got to be fast, we got to be fresh. And they're like, oh my goodness. But as y'all do this, our whole world changes and we don't have a lot of time left. And so I think, to go back to what you were saying, there's a burden there. I think there should be a burden there for us, those our age, younger, maybe wherever, to slow down in moments like we recently had and say, let's sit in what that would feel like, right? As a child, you know what it feels like to have a favorite toy and the buttons are falling off, or the weaving is coming out, or you lose it, you don't know where it is, or we got to give it away, or someone took it, and how painful that is. And you have that experience as a child, right? So what does this individual feel like? And then what is the beauty in that life season, in that life stage? And how can we have those, like you were saying, Roger, how can we have those times of sharing across those generations to where we are able to reciprocate that appreciation for foundations, for innovation, for creativity, for times of speeding up, for times of slowing down, to where everybody can feel seen and feel heard? What are those practices that we can bring in to where everybody feels that fire and feels as if when I am engaged with this, and it sometimes feels like this stranger, but you can be in the same church, but depending on how those subsets are, it can feel like that individual, you see them every Sunday, but they're a stranger, right? But for us to see one another and hear one another and experience God in our conversations with one another, what does that feel like? What does that look like? What do we do as pastors, as ministry leaders? What is our role in turning our focus inward toward one another in the church? You know what I'm saying? To develop that love and that appreciation. Maybe I'm rambling, but
This makes me think of our conversation from yesterday and kind of like our frustrations with the elders in the church. And it's kind of like the same sense of this church is a part of their identity, right? And for us to come in like with all these new technologies and all these new think pieces and stuff, and we're just like, hey, change who you are, change your identity. You poured so much into the way this church looks like now, and this is kind of like what you've been given and what you've upheld all this time, and we're asking you to change it. And just thinking of ways of like, it was kind of mentioned, but like, how can we see each other, each generation as human and being and having more grace, or it's kind of being like, how can we approach this change in a way that benefits everybody, and also recognizing like, you could be kind of a little stubborn, but at the same time, I realized like, this is kind of like your baby. This is your thing, and I'm coming in asking you to change the way you raise this whole thing up. And it just begs that question of like, yeah, like how do we approach that in a manner of like, yes, we're prompting change, but also I recognize and I'm giving gratitude for what you've done, but it's just like, okay, but how can we change? And then I think that goes back into like a lot of practices in the world of there's this resistance to change, and then there's this force of change, and how do we balance the two?
Yeah, that makes me think of like, how do we as leaders be able to differentiate the difference between resistance to change out of fear and resistance to change out of power? Because I think that we can have a lot more grace for someone who is fearful of change versus someone who has power and is resistant to sharing that.
And I think also though with that power comes a fear, right? Because if that's all you've known, or like that's your identity of like, this makes me feel good, or I feel like I have some sense of control, there's a fear of being like, okay, well, what do I do next if I don't have this control or this money or this whatever position?
I'll share one way to do things. Well, some wisdom that you've probably heard. A pastor coming to a church that's been around a while, the wisdom is journey with them for a year, pretty much doing things the way they've been doing it, so that they know that you love them just as they are. And then after you've built some trust and rapport, then you might gradually start making some tweaks and changes in that second, third, and fourth year. There's some wisdom there. They also kind of hope that pastors are a magic wand and all of a sudden new people will show up in their first year without making those changes. But there's something that you can do. You can leave a main service pretty much as it is, but then you can add something. So several churches I've been at, I do this thing called Nature Church. I started this in Boulder, and I've done it in Iowa. I've done it in Grand Junction, and I'm doing it in Mankato. So 2 Saturdays a month during the time of year where it makes sense in Minnesota, basically April through October, 2 Saturdays a month, we meet at the church, drive to a trailhead at a county, city, or state park. We set an intention, share some special words before we start. We walk in silence for about 15, 20 minutes. We sit in silence for about 15, 20 minutes, noticing, creation speaking. Then we compare notes, talk about it, offer a few scriptures or prayers, insights from various traditions about creation, offer communion, offer a little mud ritual to re-earth ourselves, and then we walk out not in silence, just in fellowship. And so that's meeting a need. For some people, it creates a bit more of that awe, enchantment, but it's parallel to what already what already is. It's not changing what is, it's adding a separate option. And so that's another thing to try, is to add new portals and do good quality what's already there, but add some new things as well.
I also wonder about, as Christians, we're people of the resurrection, and so one of the things we were talking about last night, Roger, was like the fact that certain generations aren't necessarily, like certain people of the oldest generations aren't allowing for a shift of power, right? Like you come into a church and they say, like, here's our culture. Al's serving a church and it was like, what is it? Learn our culture, learn our culture. And Shanika is going to a church and very old, right? Like 100 something years old.
And we have to learn the culture there too.
Learn the culture, and like, I'm a historic family member versus like when she's trying to welcome someone, they're like, oh no, this is my church. And it's like, well, there's like an us versus them. And I'm struggling with like trying to get involved in some organizations that are like just held in the hands of people who are retired and have time to do it, and not seeing any shift in collaborative thinking. And this is going to sound bad, but like some of these places will die, right? The church is dying. There are communities that are dying and nonprofits are dying, and whether that's because there's not an intentionality to follow Ashley's, what is it, your model of friendship, right? Like, her theory of friendship, like we're getting stuck in us them thinking, we're getting stuck in power structures, we're getting stuck on not allowing for there to be a breath of fresh air, like a change of energy, and then those institutions might die.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that
That's
nonprofit that's being run by 70-year-olds and don't want to add any new people into it. Like when it's too late, when they say, "Oh, I can't do this anymore. Can you come in and do it just as I was doing it?" I might say, "No, I don't want to do that. I want to do it your way." I might want to breathe new life into it. If they're like, "No, I'm resistant. You're not breathing new life into it," it might end, and it's scary for things to end. I think it's. In Austin, there's a Lutheran church that just closed earlier this year, and my heart hurts over thinking about my home congregation closing, right? Like, if my home congregation closed, I feel like a part of me would break apart, because I love that church and it nurtured me. But we're also people of the resurrection, and so like, how do we trust that even if things die, one, God was at work in them in their life, like trusting that. But two, like new things may come out of it, legacies or gifts or invitations. Because like what you're saying here, actually, if someone is resistant to change because they don't want to let go of their power and they hold it, they might drag a church down or a nonprofit or a community. And maybe it won't ever get to change until that happens.
Right.
It might be until it's too late, but it might also be just like the time that is needed to see the new life. Like sometimes things just have to die, but we're so resistant to death in our culture.
I think there's a beauty in things dying off, or like the idea of it might be too late. I think it's like not too late, but first is right on time. Like they were meant to take that first step, but they weren't meant to carry out the full idea. Maybe. And just kind of like how we mentioned, growth and decline happen at the same time. So every time something ends or something happens or whatever that we might think is tragic or something is destroyed, this is making space for something else to happen. It's kind of like that ideology of like, if I have a closed fist, I can't receive anything that God is trying to give me. I have to open it up and make space for it, right? And I think there's such a beauty in that grief that we oftentimes, though, we only look at the negative consequences of it, that we can't necessarily always see the positive consequences of it. There's something else. And it went away.
No, but that's good because Cece, like you're saying, it's like we're afraid of death and like we're not allowing things to be phoenixes or whatever the plural is for a phoenix and let something beautiful and new rise from
I thought that too. I was like, that can't be right.
A gaggle of phoenix.
That's right. Right? Moose. In Moose Eye or whatever. The point is letting breathing new life, right? Letting something wonderful grow from the death of something that was, and it was amazing, and let that be what it is, but let it evolve into whatever it's supposed to be now. And it's okay. Like evolution, we're gonna be okay, y'all.
Yeah, that's the thing I was gonna add is expectations. That's what it is. It's just like, how can we trust that this is gonna happen, or how can we try to be in so much control and be like, oh, I think I need it to happen while I'm still alive or within this certain time frame or whatever. But we gotta realize, like, no matter what, God is always working, right? And it's going to come to fruition. But we kind of have this, I want to be a part of it type of mentality where it's like, I want to see it happen, or how do I put my hand on it? And sometimes it doesn't involve us, or it might happen to generations after us, but it's going to happen.
I mean, that's what the early church, they were like, Jesus is coming back, y'all.
Right.
Like, get on board, he's coming back. And then just hasn't. Like, I would like that to happen during my life. I wanted that to happen during their life. But you're right.
And I feel like this goes back to the Re-Enchanting and that loss of relationship with natural creation, because the more that we are engaged with nature, we see those life stages, and we also see, like in the parables, and if we do gardening or whatever, that you're not always the person who gets the fruit of the seed that you plant. So I think that's also one of the struggles. As we were talking through earlier, here, I don't want to say it wrong, but I probably didn't write it down. Oh, vocal points and technology. So one of our vocal points is nature and creation versus technology. If we're not paying attention to those things, I think sometimes our expectations get, foggy.
Yeah.
And I think about this whole idea of reaping what we sow is also this kind of our whys. And sometimes we need to check our whys, right? And why do I necessarily need to reap it? Why can't my kids and my kids' kids reap it? Like, why does it have to be me personally? Even though I put in the work maybe or whatever, it's just like, why am I doing this? Am I doing it so I can benefit, or am I doing this for God's, community?
It's good.
Can we shift gears?
Shift it, Joel.
Can you start talking about the praying with plants chapter?
There we go. There it was.
That's what I'm here for.
So I think I am deducing you're wanting to talk about chapter 6.
Yes.
Okay, so what in particular would you like me to talk about, or is there a question, or?
Well, can I preface it real fast too, Joel?
Please.
Of that, I think the praying with plants is a very specific aspect of it, but I think that anytime we introduce a different practice or a new practice in a community, there's a possibility for pushback, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to just frame it in that lens too, that no matter what the practice is, there's going to be potential for pushback. I think this one specifically might have an exaggerated pushback for a variety of reasons, which I think you go into very well in the book, Roger. But yeah, go ahead, Joel. Go with what your
Yeah,
question is.
so to be honest, I didn't get to a ton of that chapter life.
Life.
And so I'm curious about it as a Christian practice.
Yeah.
Really,
All right. So the Religion Media News Service sent a reporter to the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina back in July, and the person who wrote the article kind of exaggerated things. There were maybe like 60 talks over those 4 days, but the way she did the headline, very sensational. Psychedelics take center stage at this year's Wild Goose Festival, and there were at most 4 talks that dealt with it. Mine was one of them, and is 4 talks out of 60 taking center stage? I would say no, although it is new for those to be on the table at the Wild Goose Festival and other settings. First of all, in that article, she sort of mischaracterized some of the things that I said. She basically said that Pastor Roger Wolsey says psychedelics is a way for the church to win back young people or something like that. And what I said was not that psychedelics are a way for the church to win back young people, but being open to how spirit is at work in psychedelics and being non-judgmental of people who are employing that practice for healing or spiritual practice, that will help the church. Being open to how God could be at work in these practices and being non-judgmental of people who are participating in them. That's very different than somehow saying that churches should be offering psychedelics at church or something. That's a mischaracterization of what I'm saying. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a Christian practice. However, I don't think Christianity has a monopoly on salvation. And salvation at its root, sozo in the Greek, it's really about wholeness, well-being, liberation. And, you've heard the phrase, all healing is of God. Well, either it's true or it isn't. So do we welcome vaccines? Do we welcome blood transfusions? Do we welcome surgery? Do we welcome chiropractic? Do we welcome psychoanalysis? Do we welcome chemotherapy, which is quite toxic? What do we make space for and welcome, and what do we say no? And if there's 2,000 years of tradition and transformation that you can cite in something, you might want to be careful saying God can't be at work there, right? Let's err on the side of allowing God to be coloring outside of the lines that we are most familiar with. And I talk in the book, this is from 1755 on in the 1780s. And I would say John Wesley, as a pastor, wiring people up to electricity boxes is far more radical than a pastor in 2024 lifting up something that has 2,000 years worth of tradition and lineage and success and normalizing it. So I'm giving it perspective. And I say that this is within the realm of salvation. Jesus didn't just preach, he was a healer. And many of the early rabbis and preachers, St. Hildegard of Bingen, all sorts of people were healers. John Wesley wrote a book, Primitive Physic, which is essentially a book on plant medicine, on healing. And so I'm not doing anything that's really out of the norm. Pastors are about the well-being and care of people. There was a person having profound migraines in my last church, and I knew that craniosacral therapies might be of help to her. She found a doctor of osteopathy, had 2 sessions of craniosacral, and hasn't had a migraine since. that's because I'm picking up things and offering, well, this might be of service, maybe check this out. If I'm a pastor and I care about the well-being of people, I want them fed, I want them sheltered, I want them safe, I want their bodies to be as good as possible. That's part of salvation. It's not just where you go after you die. It's the wellness work. So it's not that sacred plant medicine, ayahuasca, psilocybin is a Christian practice, but as a Christian pastor, I can know that these tools can be helpful for some people in some circumstances, and it can be a part of the salvation package for that person. But that doesn't mean that it's a Christian practice. Does that help?
Yeah.
This is an off topic, but I really like that statement, salvation is wellness work. We've been doing a lot of talk of reclaiming different terms and things like that. And I think salvation is one of those terms I personally have like an allergic reaction to. So I really appreciate that wording of that. So thank you.
Well, and interestingly, going with the liberation aspect of salvation, ayahuasca and psilocybin are profoundly helpful. Numerous studies, and I got lots of endnotes backing everything up in the book, profoundly helpful in people breaking free from alcohol and heroin and cocaine addictions. So the stuff that actually is harmful to people, this medicine can actually help people be liberated from those addictions. So it's a very helpful tool in the tool belt for that aspect as well. Now, I don't want to come across as like that's one chapter of a 7-chapter book. And it is probably the chapter that many people are going to buy the book for. Like, well, what is this Christian pastor going to say about this stuff? Does he know what he's talking about? If the Burning Man people might be curious what this Christian has to say, and the power Christian people want to see if I've gone into heresy or something. But there are in between some very, very open-minded people who are just looking for help in life. And that's who I'm primarily trying to reach. Yeah.
Will you go a little bit deeper into that and talk about like your connection with Hunt Priest and Lagare and some of those folks?
Yeah. So when I started writing the book, really I didn't really know about Lagare until February of 2022. And in the week after Easter 2022, I did a plant medicine journey. Lagare didn't sponsor it, but they sort of were affiliated with that weekend. And I met Hunt. He wasn't one of the facilitators, but he was there. He was a seasoned veteran. I had already done some ayahuasca journeys and psilocybin journeys, but this was my first time doing a psilocybin journey in a group setting, and certainly the first time in a overtly Christian setting. It was profoundly beautiful. I described the experience in the book. And I've become friends with Hunt. He wrote the foreword to Discovering Fire. And I'm sort of on a team of people trying to help more states do as Colorado and Washington have done, which is to legalize psilocybin and gradually get it at least decriminalized and more. Minneapolis, the police chief there has flat out said that he's not having his police officers police psilocybin or ayahuasca. He calls them entheogens, which are basically God-inducing. I think this guy's probably journeyed if he's talking like that. But he knows that they do more good than harm, and that he wants the officers focusing on things that are harming society, not things that are helping. So he's effectively on his own decriminalized it in Minneapolis. But it's that kind of work that I'm a little bit of a advocate. The current church I'm serving, some of the people have joined the church because of the new book and my approach, and some people are wary. They knew about the first book and my promoting of progressive Christianity. They were all on board with that. And then when I came as their new pastor, the new book had come out, and I think some folks felt a little, what the heck? This is a little too far. And there are a few people that are a bit wary of me because of the new book. And so I'm cautious in the local church about what I say and how. And I'm in the thick of this. I'm in the, it's not like I have this privileged life that, it's real. There are bumps and bruises and challenges that I experience. And I can do no other because I know that this is of God. I know that this can't be a healing for at least some people. And so I can't not share about it, but it's not like my calling is the gospel. And to help do that, I think being fluent with how things are helpful in the world can only help me as I'm trying to promote the gospel in Jesus. So I don't need to reject things that some would reject. I don't reject tarot cards. I don't reject astrology. I don't reject ecstatic dance. I don't reject yoga. I don't reject psilocybin, plant medicine. I don't reject dream work, even though they aren't all that common in the Christian world. That doesn't mean some people are not benefiting from that. And some Christians dabble in those things. And so why not talk about it? And if we can talk about it, we don't have to be so afraid of it. And that can only be helpful. Getting away from fear mindset to, oh, isn't God amazing? Going back to that enchantment. Look at what Spirit's doing now. How about that? So that's the shift that I'm trying to invite. Yeah.
One of the things I've really appreciated about Ligare is, and I think you bring it up in the book too, is there's this idea of it's not just the experience of the plant medicine, but it's really an integration piece. And I think that's something that is important for practices as a whole. And probably a good conversation to have too is this idea of what's the benefit for the individual, and then what's the potentially even added benefit of doing this in community and finding a way to integrate it into the fullness of your life as opposed to just a one-off experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people will do a sacred plant journey and maybe only have one or two journeys, but they're now sort of part of that family. And can they be among peers in a local church setting, in a life group, a Bible study? Can they share about their experience, even if they aren't actively doing it? It was something they did. It served its piece. But can we create a container which allows people to share about those experiences and not have it be taboo? That's critical work, because if someone has had transformation and shift and healing, but is withholding talking about it in church, well, what the heck? That why wouldn't we want to know about your healing, your transformation? And that doesn't mean we're all going to do it the way you did, but we're being deprived of hearing how God is at work. We need wind in our sails. We need those stories of hope and transformation. And even if I never have an amazing dream like you did, or even if I don't have a yoga practice like you, or if I've never done psilocybin, well, that doesn't mean I'm going to do those things, but I'm blessed by fellow humans sharing how Spirit's been at work. And so that's really what it comes down to.
It's interesting that Rolling Stone, we talked about this yesterday, Rolling Stone just had an article come out about how people are using for mental health and like to heal that way, but experiencing God in the midst of that. And I feel like as a good Methodist and a good follower of John Wesley, it's only my duty to explore what does this mean for people in religious experiences, right? It's my calling as a minister. I say that kind of playfully, also kind of seriously, right? Like if people really are having like divine encounters with this, then what does that really mean? It's definitely worth the exploration thereof to figure out what is the healing, what's the experience. But yeah, Ashley, go ahead.
Well, I have more of like a practical thing that I struggle with. So I appreciate the differentiating between Christian practices and spiritual practices, because Christian practices are spiritual practices, but spiritual practices are not necessarily Christian. So when it comes to spiritual practices, such as okay, sorry, I don't want to spiral. So when it comes to cultural appropriation and introducing some of these spiritual practices to a congregation, like one of the things that I struggle with, and maybe I am thinking too hard about it, but like when it comes to like sound baths or crystals or like all of these other things, like when I think about like, okay, so how do I like educate them in such a way that it's a responsible way to introduce these things? And then I get really overwhelmed and like, you know what? I don't have time to do all that stuff. So like, I guess we're just not going to do the end thing, because I don't know what's the responsible way to introduce things outside of Christianity. in a way that's not culturally appropriating.
Yeah, and I do talk about cultural appropriation quite a bit in chapter 6. And I make a distinction between ayahuasca and psilocybin in those regards as well. I mean, I don't want to promote my book, but there are several books on the market, and there's no doubt going to be more. Discovering Fire is one of them. A way to introduce things is through a book discussion group, and particularly if the book does write by these matters and names and talks about appropriation issues and wrestles with it, and you can see someone wrestling with those matters, that can lead to the conversations, and that could be an entry point. So Sunday worship service might not happen right away. Maybe a year or two of people discussing these matters through book studies, and then it shows up in a service on healing and the range of how God's at work. Might make more sense, because if you don't do that kind of thing, it really does open a can of worms, and you have to be into damage control mode unnecessarily. So you're right. There's a certain strategy about things and what just makes sense in the unfolding. What's a more organic, healthy unfolding? Rather, you don't want to be a bulldozer or a bull in a china shop, right? So,
Well, Roger, you've been very generous with your time. Does anybody have a kind of final burning question or thought they really want to bring? Burning, is that what
Yeah.
you're okay? Yeah.
if anybody wants to interact with me, you go to rogerwolsey.com. There's a way to contact or message, and you're welcome to share my email that I've been sharing with you to the others if they want. If anyone has, I may not respond right away. I got a busy life, but I will respond probably within the week. And there may be more questions as you read more. New questions might show up, and I want to be available while I have life on this planet to be of service. So I'm happy to continue the conversation.
I really appreciate that, and I think that if you're interested in pursuing something like this, like a book study in your setting, like having those conversations as a group, and then maybe inviting Roger in to cap off the conversation would be really helpful. Yeah. Well, Roger, again, thank you. This has just been very enlightening, and we're grateful for you and for the book and for your vulnerability and for setting the stage of that. It's been really awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Good to meet you all. Blessings in your current ministries and in the future ways that God's going to be using all of you.
Thank you.